Good evening and welcome to another edition of The Author Show. I'm Denny Stockdale and my guest this evening is Kari Berit. And Kari, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for being with me this evening. You've written an amazing book here for caregivers, The Unexpected Caregiver. And what's the subtitle on that?
How boomers can keep mom and dad active, safe, and independent.
And I love that. That's a great goal. And I think you've really achieved it with this book.
Thanks.
There's so many tips and there's so much richness with this that we could really talk about. I think let's start off with like the first chapter, when you start talking about communication.
Yes, something that we don't practice on a daily basis. And I think what I say in my book too is when parents become ill or there's a crisis, we revert to 12-year-olds. And that communication, whatever we learned, it all goes, weep, all goes away.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And having the courage to ask questions of our parents.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things you mentioned in your book was not to get hooked by some of the conversations. And what are some things that our viewers might be able to do to really start a conversation and some of the questions they might ask?
A few things. Really, when you start a conversation, like maybe you're concerned about dad's driving. Driving's a huge one. And you're concerned about dad's driving. How do you bring that up to dad? Well, you bring it up once, but again, use it as an observation. Dad, I've observed that when I rode with you, you weren't as sure as you have been in the past. What have you noticed? And then be quiet and let them answer and talk to you. The conversation might not go real well the first time, and what I say is, that's fine, drop it and go away, but come back again and have that conversation. And if you're coming into the conversation from love and from care, then it's going to be a good thing eventually. But if you're coming because you're the adult child and you think your parent is a dumb older person and they don't know any better, then it's not going to be a good conversation. So try to bring it up. You can even say things about driving again. I notice, Dad, as I get older, I have more difficulty seeing in my peripheral vision. How about you?
Yeah.
So bring up things that way.
Okay. Yeah, so using I statements and
Absolutely.
talking a little bit about how we might be aging.
Yes.
And giving them a little hint that maybe they are too.
Exactly, because we all are aging. I mean, that's something that we all run from, this thing called aging, and we're all doing it. So we might as well talk about it, but talking about it is not a popular subject, so you have to use a lot of humor, and you're right. When we were earlier before the show, we were talking about self-deprecating. I joke on myself where I take notice of what's changing in me and then bring it up with Dad.
Sure, sure. Yeah, and I know my father, he passed away before we had to take the keys away. But it was getting to that point where we were just about ready as his kids to have a conversation with him.
Yeah. And those are tough conversations because you can be loving and gentle, but we also have to put ourselves in their shoes and think about what it means to not have a driver's license.
Oh, yeah.
It's huge. And another thing that I'll tell my baby boomer audiences when I'm speaking is, don't go in so quickly. If they're driving okay and they're monitoring and they're taking the side streets and driving off hours, that's okay, because if they don't drive, who are they going to expect to be driving them places?
Us.
That's right. And you don't necessarily want to take that on.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I noticed as I read your book was not only the tips but I really like the title, The Unexpected Caregiver. And even though I've got an aging mom, and I'm a caregiver for her, I expected to do some of these things, and yet as I read your book, there's some really good ideas that I got out of there that can help with like family memories, storytelling, and so many amazing things.
And you're probably a different, unique person then, because you've expected it, and really, we all ought to be expecting it. If we look at demographics and the shifting and how many older adults we're going to have, and the fact that there are going to be more 65-plus-year-olds and more 85-plus-year-olds than there are going to be younger people very soon, we really ought to expect this role. But reality is we don't. And that is because we don't talk about aging. So because none of us are aging, we don't have to ever worry about mom and dad, so to speak. And then when it hits us, and all of a sudden I hear story after story of someone that has said, was at work, the hospital called, it was time to discharge mom, and they wanted me to come and get her. What am I supposed to do now? And see, all of a sudden, that's that unexpected caregiver. We ought to have seen it coming, but really most of us don't see it coming.
Right, right. And even though I saw it coming, there's some things that I haven't planned for.
That's true.
So there's some things in my caregiving that are unexpected.
So what were some of the things in your caregiving that were unexpected?
Well, like a call at 10 o'clock at night from my mom, and she's got a computer. And can you really help me with my email right now? My email's down. 10 o'clock at night. Wait a minute. I've got my own chores.
Yeah.
So little things like that.
If you read the part in my book, I talk about my grandpa a lot because I was a family caregiver to my grandpa. And my aunt was his primary caregiver living in the home with him. And my aunt would call me sometimes at 2 in the morning and say, he wants a typewriter. What does he want a typewriter for? And again, that's the kind of unexpectedness that comes with this role as a family caregiver. I've been trained in this field and have worked as a manager in dementia care, assisted living, senior housing. So I've been trained and I've studied aging. So I understand what's going on here and what he had and what his diagnosis was of dementia. My aunt didn't understand that. So when Grandpa asked for a typewriter, she's taking that literally. And I'm saying, no, he probably doesn't really want a typewriter. Rather, he wants to tell you something. And so how then can you work with him and say, what do you want to say? Let me write it down. You know, those kinds of things.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's learning those tools.
Yeah. And speaking of the dementia and some of the loss of memory, you've got some great tools in your book for handling not necessarily memory loss, but keeping our memory vital at any age. And one of the things that I really noticed was that memory really doesn't decline necessarily, or our brain power doesn't decline with age.
That's exactly
if we keep it active. It's like a muscle.
Right.
What are some of the things you might recommend to people to keep brains active?
The number one, physical exercise, really. Because if you keep your body in shape and that oxygen flowing to your brain just works better. Every heartbeat, your brain takes 25% of the blood and oxygen. So it uses that, it needs that. So again, keeping our body physically fit, that 10,000 steps a day type of thing. But then beyond that, using a good omega-3, and I talk about that on my website, using Sudoku, crossword puzzles, reading. Best thing is learning a different language or an instrument. Because what you want to do is something that is new and different or novel and complex. You want to stretch how you normally do things so that your brain says, oh my goodness, I got to wake up. I got to turn on. And that gets your brain just humming. It's like in my book, I talk about the branches or your dendrites. And we've got all these dendrites, and it's like they're kind of slow and sluggish. And then when you start learning, it's like they say, hey, this is kind of cool. And they wake up and they make new connections and they find each other. And it's a marvelous thing to see any adult, and especially I've worked a lot more with older adults, when you do learn something, your brain wakes up. You know how it is if you're just learning something new, and you go down the street and you go, hey, I just read about that. Hey, I just saw this. And you're also reconnected. So another piece too I talk about is socialization and getting out there and making new friends. That takes a lot of brain power, to think in a different way or to listen to someone who isn't like you, you know, and to accept that. And then I have tools that I use, like mental fitness cards, 100 cards that you can pull and do these great exercises. And the fun thing about them, Denny, is if you've got grandkids and maybe the grandkids don't understand what's wrong with Grandpa if he's got some dementia, you can put these cards in front of them and it's a neutral territory. With siblings, I use it when siblings I do caregiver coaching, and when I get the whole family there and all the siblings aren't getting along, sometimes I pull a mental fitness card and we do some crazy exercise. It does several things. It gets our brains going, it gets us laughing, and it gets us out of that emotional pool.
Sure. One of the exercises I noticed that resonated with me was counting to 100 in threes.
I know.
And I thought, how could I actually pull that one off? Or
Yeah.
reciting the alphabet backwards.
Yeah, oh yeah, all those things. And really, people say, oh, I can't do that, and they don't do it. But it's not it's the challenge. It's the journey of challenging your mind to think in a different way. I teach Norwegian language, and when I teach to older adults, they get frustrated. They can't remember this word, or they can't make this sound like they want to make. And a lot of times what we'll do is we'll breathe and meditate before, so that you're not so frustrated with yourself, but you're going in with a more relaxed attitude. You're laughing more. I use a lot of humor in my teaching.
I'll bet you do.
So that we can just laugh about it. And the goal is not necessarily to be fluent or perfect. The goal is to keep working that brain and trying something new and challenging.
Right, right. Yeah, and I know the first time I hear a new word, I don't remember it,
No.
but you know, through repetition, I will.
Right.
And I know you've taught Norwegian. How did you start that out?
Well, this started my whole career, actually. I graduated in 1986 from St. Olaf College with a double major, psychology and Norwegian.
Oh.
And I ended up being asked to teach an elder hostel up at the Concordia Language Villages. And those are week-long programs for adults 55 and older. Elder Hostels now changed their name to fit with us baby boomers, and it's now Rhodes Scholar. But I was asked to direct that program, and I've been doing that now for 21 years. And so in the fall and in the spring, I go up and I have these marvelous, mostly 60-plus people, but there are younger people now starting to come who want to learn this language. To reconnect with their heritage, or some people are coming just because they want to work their brain and exercise and be in an environment that's up in northern Minnesota and beautiful.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
But it led to my career that I'm doing now, because when I first went up there for the first time, I said, wow, these older adults are so active and engaging, and they're a hoot to teach, and they challenge me. So I actually went on to get a master's degree in adult education.
Wow, that's wonderful.
Yeah, and then that led to looking at what are activity programs offering our residents in, we didn't have assisted living then, but in senior living, and then later on in assisted living. What are we offering these people to do? And I've always been one that said, let's get more brain work in there, let's get more physical work in there, let's get more time for connection. And I didn't always want to be the director of those activities. I would pull in the residents, because they can direct these activities too.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, as I first skimmed your book, when I first got it, there were a couple of things that really resonated with me. One was music,
Yeah.
and the other one was you're a dog lover.
I am a dog
And
lover.
you've got, speaking of the exercise
Yeah.
and the physical exercise, you've got a whole chapter devoted to walking with two legs. And I love the way you really identified or named each chapter.
Yeah. That was in large thanks to my editor, Dick Schaff. He just did a marvelous job in helping me come up with those names, those
Yeah,
titles.
but walking with two legs or more, and
Yeah.
you really advocate walking.
I do, and I'm a walker. I've been a walker all my life, and I also do the Nordic walking, which is very accessible for all of us, and it gives us a little more stability and works up our upper body. Walking is such a fantastic exercise, especially if you can get outside. I'm a big outside lover too.
Oh, yeah.
Outside. And then I tied in animals and dogs, and of course I have a dog, and that dog is a big reason that we get out 365 days of the year, because she loves to walk, and she's used to that. She demands that walk. And so sometimes it's sad when I hear some adults say, well, I'm going to give up my dog because they're too much work. And I kind of want to say, adult children out there, don't necessarily take away the pets right away from
Right.
mom and dad. That might not be the best answer. Maybe you need to get someone in to help with them, but encourage, if your parents are a dog, cat lover, to let them have that animal in some way, shape, or form. Granted, there could be some safety concerns that you need to look out for, no doubt. But if we can get animals in people's lives, they do such wonderful things for us.
Yeah, whether it's a dog or a cat or a fish
Exactly, anything.
or even a plant for some people.
No, you're exactly right. It's that living thing that we're interconnecting with.
Right.
Instead of having people do things for us, especially as we get
Right.
older, we want to keep doing for ourselves as much as we can.
Right, right. And for some of the seniors, having something to give back to
Yeah.
is very important.
And you mentioned the story of Bailey.
Yes, there's a Bailey and Alice sidebar in your book.
I know. And the Bailey sidebar in my book, Bailey is a sweet little dog at a retirement community. And she jumped up into this woman's lap, and Bailey just hung out there. And the woman hadn't talked for years, you know? And the son was with her and said, "Mom, we got to get going, let Bailey go." And she just was listening to Bailey, and she said, "No, I'm not done yet. Bailey still has something to say." You know, and she just really made a connection with that dog. And sometimes if we have a parent or loved one with dementia or Alzheimer's or other types of diseases, sometimes it's those animals that slow down enough or are at the right pace that they can make that connection with them that we sometimes can't.
You mentioned generational differences, and that our parents actually grew up in a different era without all the technology that we've got today.
Right.
And it was a different pace of life.
It was.
In fact, you mentioned your dad having a 6-year-old piece of turkey in the freezer.
I love my turkey story. When we moved in with my dad after my mother died, my husband and I have no kids, and we moved in to share a home with my dad because we'd lived in Denver, Colorado at the time and always wanted to move back to Minnesota. So we moved in and we were cleaning things out, and in the freezer I was chipping under ice, and I pulled out this piece of turkey and I went to throw it away, and my dad said, "Oh, no, that might still be good." And I said, "You've got to be kidding." But my dad cooked that piece of turkey up and he ate it, all the time saying, "It's not the worst I've had." But you know, the idea of slowing down too, I've had to really learn that because I'm a very high energy, fast-paced person. And what I have learned, even with living with my dad, not that he's that slow, but with everybody in different generations, is to try to match paces. Because what it does for me when I slow down with other people who are going at a slower pace is I get a break. I get that breathing. So you get something back by doing that too, by connecting with the different generations. Speed is not always the best.
Right.
Youth is not the be-all, end-all. There are good things and gifts about aging.
Sure.
And slowing down, and it's okay, and we need to embrace that. But if we don't talk about it, it seems like such a foreign thing. And sometimes as adult children, we tend to look at it as something that we want to avoid, and therefore we don't spend as much time with mom and dad because they're too slow or depressing. But they're not. There are all these stories. We just need to be with them and make that connection, and that takes us slowing down and turning down all the stuff that's going on in our brains.
Yeah. And in your book, you've got some great tips at different points in the book for stories. One of the things that I noticed was that if there's a particular message that we might have to deliver to our parents or to our kids, the grandkids, that might be difficult, we can pick up a children's book.
Yeah. Children's books are a marvelous way to help start a conversation, or maybe to encourage your parents to write down some of their thoughts and values that they want to pass down. But it's marvelous. The one that I quote probably the most is Annie and the Old One, which is that about death.
Okay.
And so if death is a difficult topic, or maybe mom or dad, grandma or grandpa are getting older and the younger kids don't understand, or even you're having a tough time with it, to pick up a book such as Annie and the Old One and read that. It reminds us that death is really a natural part of life, the end marker, but it comes and it's okay. Sometimes if we learn a little about something that we're afraid of, it becomes less fearful. And children's books are marvelous books to help us with that.
Oh, yeah. And you mentioned the parents writing their own stories.
Yes.
And you had a grandmother that I think did something illegal at one time.
And if you met Grandma Gladys, you would not think that she did anything illegal. But she, I put the tape recorder in front of her once because I wanted to capture her stories. And people sometimes get bothered by that at first, but then they forget that it's there. She was telling these stories. She and her boyfriend at the time and another couple would jump on the train all night and go to Chicago from Minneapolis, dance all night, get back on the train, and then go back to work Monday morning. And then she married this guy, and she kept working at the bank. And in those days, you couldn't be married and still work.
Oh, okay.
So she would hide the fact that she was married and continue to go to work until she got pregnant. Then she figured, the gig's up.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's a great story.
Yeah.
And that's a great technique, too, for capturing stories, is using a tape recorder.
Tape recorder, or these days you can even put a video camera in front of them, and they'll ignore it at first. You know, they'll soon ignore it. And I've got tips in my book about how to do that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you've got some great tips on how to write the story, too.
Yes, yes. They could write a children's story, they can write their own letter to you, or narrative. They're called ethical wills, really. A way of passing down your values and keeping for us, the children, to hear our stories, hear their stories, excuse me.
Yeah, yeah. As I was reading your book, I thought, we've started some of this with my mom, and there's so much more that I could do, or that we could do as a family.
Yeah.
And it would actually get us connected, not only with her, but with each other. And you mentioned earlier that you work with families. And,
I do.
And do you work a lot with families or individuals, or?
Usually what happens is when I deliver a keynote presentation or I'm in a seminar, I'll talk about family and sibling rivalries.
Okay.
And that usually gets the lead caregiver that's out in the audience to come up to me and say, my siblings won't help at all, or we're not getting along, or we don't agree. So then that's my opportunity as a caregiver coach to work with that one person, and then that generally leads to maybe a family meeting. Because sometimes when there are issues that are happening with mom and dad, and you don't understand aging, you don't understand the healthcare system, you're not sure what the disease is, you've got all these issues, money, where they're living, it becomes overwhelming. And when you try to get together as a family, you're going to revert back to how you were when you were in the family system and all about 12 years old sitting around the dining room table. So those personalities come out, and we end up pushing each other's buttons. So what I do is I get in there, meet with them, and help sort out some of these issues. And really, my goal in being a caregiver coach is to help make this caregiving time joyful, loving, and frankly, there are kids that don't get along with their parents. They did not have happy childhoods, and now mom and dad are back and they need some help, and there's real conflict there. Part of them wants to give care, another part of them is still holding on to anger. So I help them get through that so that they can give care and, almost build a new, different relationship.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And it takes a certain type of individual to do that.
It does.
To come in as a neutral party and just sort out the conversations.
And I worked so long with older adults, so I love older adults, but I also know the adult children issues too. So to know both of those and then to come together and help bring them together.
Yeah.
Yeah. And teach them, like I do in my book, activities that they can do and how they can engage with mom and dad. So instead of going to the nursing home or going to an assisted living, and you start out the conversation with, Dad, how are you today? What a crummy way to start out a conversation.
Oh, yeah.
Don't ask it. Try to think of something else. I usually say, come in and maybe you saw something on the news, or you want to pick up on a conversation you had before, depending on how healthy mom or dad is or where they are. But bring a newspaper article in, bring a magazine, bring a new picture in. Whatever it is, try to avoid that, how are you doing today conversation.
Yeah, because that takes them right into a space where, not doing so well, and
the food here is terrible. It goes on and on and on.
Yeah. I've got too many friends, and they all want to talk to me at the same time, and I can't hear them anyway.
That's right. Yeah, you're right.
So,
yeah, right. You're right.
So, yeah, it sounds like you've got a really fascinating career.
I do. It's very diverse, and it's quite lovely. I have a radio program that I produce every week called The Unexpected Caregiver, same title as my book. And you can listen to past shows at my website, which is just my name, KariBerit.com.
Okay.
Or you can get there via unexpectedcaregiver.com. It'll get you to the same website. And you can listen to radio shows that I have in the past. And the goal of my radio show is in my tagline. The tagline is, remember, if you're a caregiver, be smart, ask for help. So in other words, we don't have to do this alone. We have to find out who's on our team. What are some things we could try? Some of the activities in my book, they may seem really strange at first to try with mom or dad, but you just give it a try and get over that kind of awkwardness, and all of a sudden you're in a different plane with them and relating to them in a whole different way. And it's really marvelous. So that's the goal of my radio show, is to bring ideas, to talk about this issue of family and informal caregiving. It's a new role. It's something that's going to happen to many of us. We have been a caregiver, we're going to be, we are, or we're going to need care, as Rosalind Carter says.
Absolutely, absolutely.
We're all coming down this line. So really my book also helps the parents, the aging parents too.
Sure.
Because it helps them to figure out how to better relate to their kids.
Yeah.
I've had a lot of older adults buy the book and then I'll underline and highlight things and give it back to their adult children.
Sure,
Yeah.
sure. And we're coming down to the end of our show, believe it or not.
Yeah.
But I know there's an important piece as a caregiver that we need from our siblings, and that's acknowledgement.
Yeah.
And at the end of your book, you mentioned something in particular, and I'd like you to just touch on that real quickly.
And I'll read that. It's a very special email I got from my brother, because in my family, I'm the primary caregiver, even though I'm daughter number 2. But and it's hard at times, because you do and you do and you do, and you inform your siblings, and I've got 2 brothers and a sister, and sometimes you feel like, gosh, no one appreciates me. So for all the family members who aren't maybe the number 1 caregiver, the primary caregiver, to get that acknowledgement is so special. And this is an email my brother Steve wrote in November of 2006. He says, I can feel that you are under new and different stressors than you were before, and I see why. Not that I didn't know. You have always been the one we can all count on in the family. It's pretty easy for the rest of us to take it for granted that you are going to handle things. You always have. But it must be tiring. You have your life to take care of and your dreams you want to achieve. I'll try to think about something that I can send you that'll be helpful later. The try part refers to me being helpful. Love, Steve.
Wow. That's wonderful. And we all need acknowledgement. And I want to thank you so much for being with me this evening.
My pleasure.
And yeah, great book.
Thank you. Thanks,
and
Denny.
Tell us your website one more time.
My name, Kari Berit, KariBerit.com, or you can get there via unexpectedcaregiver.com.
All right, and they can get your book and find out about
They can
all
get
your
my
other
book and all the other tools
services.
that I talk about are
Okay.
at my website.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Denny.
Hi, this is Denny Stockdale, and I've been talking with Kari Berit this evening, the author of The Unexpected Caregiver. So this closes off this segment, and I want to invite you to read your life so you can lead your life.